Hi everyone, it's Rachel back with the Shades of Orange, and today I'm here to bring you my first wrap-up of 2023, which is the beginning of a new year of reading. However, the books I'm talking about are actually books that I read at the end of last year, but let's not get too technical here. Today I'm talking about horror thrillers and other dark fiction books, and if you didn't hear before, I'll just share my goals here for the new year. I didn't make an official video, but basically I want to focus on reading books I love, which in the case of dark fiction means a lot of messed up and disturbing books, and I will continue to focus on new releases so that I can weigh in on which ones are worth your time and money, as well as hopefully stumble upon some great hidden gems to talk about some books that don't get as much hype other places on BookTube. If that sounds great and you want to stick around, you can definitely subscribe. Otherwise, let's get started here. First, let's talk about All the Dangerous Things by Stacy Willingham. This is a 2023 thriller that is coming out very soon, and her debut novel, A Flicker in the Dark, was actually the first new release I read last year, so I thought it was fitting to start off my new release reading with this one here. This follows a woman who a year prior, her son disappeared in the night appearing to be kidnapped. However, there isn't a lot of evidence, so they were never able to convict and bring someone to justice. She is now going around and doing the true crime circuit, trying to raise awareness for her case so that hopefully it gets solved. And she comes into contact with a podcast journalist who wants to help her solve the case. And so he goes back with her to revisit the clues and try to puzzle it all out. This is a story that is relatively small and simple in scale, so I would say if you're a avid mystery reader, you can probably guess at least who is likely to be some of the suspects, given the fact that this is just a very small case. But in terms of readability, this was such a page turner. I blew through it. I had the opportunity to buddy read this with another friend who had an early release copy, and it was really fun to be able to talk to them and just guess what was going to happen next, try to make my predictions. Some of them were right. And again, I don't think that this book is unguessable, and I don't think that that's what this book is trying to be. Instead, it's just a fun ride, and it really did accomplish that. I can be really tough on thrillers, so it takes a particular author like this one, who I think will be a new favorite of mine, of just someone who regularly and consistently writes thrillers that I find to be just very entertaining, easy to fly through, and just a lot of fun. I really enjoyed the theme surrounding motherhood, and especially the representation of imperfect mothers, which is something I say over and over again is something I love to see in my fiction. And yeah, overall I had a lot of fun. It kind of leaned into a few tropes that I didn't like, and then it kind of turned the other way and ended up being overly satisfied with the ending of this one. I thought it was fun and yeah, just an enjoyable ride. Next up is Tell Me I'm Worthless by Alison Rumfitt, which is a book that I received for review from Tor Nightfire. And in the story, it is an own voices tale told from the perspective of a trans person working and living in modern day UK, and so the story is very topical. In terms of the social commentary, I thought it was fantastic. As a cis person myself, I have really tried to educate myself around this trans experience, but even within this book, I really did learn more than I had previously thought or considered, and so I thought that the social representation was fantastic. However, I would say that the first half of this book read more like a contemporary piece of fiction rather than a piece of horror, and so it's not till the second half of the book that the horror elements really kick in, when there is a haunted house element to the story. I like this book in terms of what it was doing, and I definitely appreciate that there's a place that is needed within our fiction culture for something like this, but in terms of the narrative, I found it to be a little bit fragmented. I wasn't really sure where the story was going, and some things were just not to the personal taste of what I enjoyed to read about. I'll be honest, this book is very vulgar and crude. It spends a lot of time talking about sexual anatomy in very open and explicit ways, which is just, for as much as I love to read dark and disturbing books, this isn't the way that I enjoy them being told, and so this book was a little bit off-putting. But again, I really have to check my privilege of the fact that I don't have to have these discussions around what is between my legs, as so many people are forced to do or are tried to be made to, and so I definitely appreciate this book. I liked it a lot, but as a horror book, I don't think it completely delivered what I was looking for in terms of the scares. Definitely the people in this book, the real life scenarios, were far more scary for me than what was actually going on in a supernatural level, but maybe that was kind of the point. Next, to catch up on a few backlist titles, I read The Strange Case of Dorian Gray by Sydney Winget, and this is a book that I received for review from the author. It was actually a Halloween surprise with no expectation to review it, but I happen to really love the story of Dorian Gray, so I was interested in checking out this. I have not read The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, so I really can't comment on how that really weaves into the book on a more detailed level. Obviously, I know the very simple version of that story, which I can see within the story, but in terms of Dorian Gray, I really love that one, so I was excited to see that he was very much first and foremost within this story. And I always like this author, how she does classic mashups, so she blends together two different classic stories into a new story. And while I enjoyed this one, I'll be honest, I like the other two that I've read by her better. I found this one to be fine, but it kind of wasn't as punchy or as interesting in terms of like mixing up or remixing the elements. It just didn't really bring anything new or uplift the original material. So I liked it. It was still fun, but I would recommend starting with one of her other two books first. Next up is The Hollows by Daniel Church. This is a book that I received for review from Angry Robot Books, and this is a piece of survival horror fiction that is set in a small remote village where there is this crazy storm that is coming in. In the town, there is a constable who comes across a dead body, and the way that they have died just seems very suspicious, and then we follow the individuals in this town as they are preparing and trying to survive this storm. If you follow my channel for a while, you know that I'm always on the lookout for more survival horror, particularly anything involving winter or snow. It's a theme video I like to do every year. I recently did one, so link down below if I remember to do that. And I'm very excited to check out this one because hopefully it will make my list for next year. I will say that in terms of a survival story, it hit all the tropes that I would expect. It was fine, but it didn't really excite me. The characters were kind of unlikable, which you could argue is kind of the point when it comes to survival horror because you kind of want them all killed off, but it didn't make for the most enjoyable experience. Again, I don't think that this book was doing anything wrong, but it wasn't doing anything new that I haven't seen before, and I just didn't get as excited about this one as I wanted to. But again, if you just love that genre, if you just want to read all the horror books set in winter, this is one you might still want to check out for yourself. Next is A History of Fear by Lucas Dumas, and this is another book that I received for review. This is actually a book that came out in December of 2022, but I got my review copy a little bit late due to not checking my spam folder in my email, and so I just got to check it out now, and I gotta say that I wish I'd read this book before finalizing my best of the year list for 2022 published books. Spoiler alert, it's coming next week on Tuesday, and I did film that before filming this, and so this definitely would have been a contender. I'm not sure if it would have made it because I have a really good solid list on there, but it definitely would have been up there. This, if you don't know, is a piece of literary horror that has been compared to things like Paul Tremblay's work, which I definitely see the comparisons because this is very character focused. It's set in Scotland where supposedly there was this iconic murderer, the serial killer, who was told to commit these murders because the devil told him to do that. And then this book is told primarily in a first-person perspective and kind of account the life of this young man and really what happened, but it's also told in like an investigative format, so you have different perspectives weighing in. I did get a chance to do the physical arc, but because I was late getting to it, the audiobook was actually out and available on Scribd, so I did part of this book as an audio, and I highly recommend it for those of you that love audio. It has multi-narration, and again, I think it works really well because it helps to differentiate the different perspectives, and just works, again, really well when any story has that like investigative angle. I think it just works well on audio, but this one was very well done. I'll be honest, it is very slow paced. It did take me a little while to get into, and it's very character focused. So if you're looking for a crazy slasher story where the serial killer is just stabbing everyone down every minute of the story, not necessarily. In fact, this book takes a lot of time to really study the phenomenon of individuals that believe that the devil or that Satan is speaking to them. And in a lot of ways, it reminded me more of Whisper Down the Lane because of the fact that this book is almost more talking about the nonfiction reality surrounding it rather than the horror itself. But don't worry, if you keep going with the story, it does get into the creepy elements. It definitely gets psychological, and it did get really creepy towards the end. There were some twists and turns that I thought, whoa, I did not see that coming. Maybe I should have, but it still just really caught me off guard in a way that I found just very eerie. So I wouldn't want to say that this book isn't possibly predictable, but I just enjoyed going along for the ride. It is slow paced, but is worth your time. It's worth it. It's like that slow burn that is just very satisfying when it all comes together. So I do recommend this one. Solid read, excellent prose, excellent story. I would definitely love to see more by this author, and I highly recommend this one. And I just want to mention that if you can't wait till next Tuesday for my best horror of 2022, I did record an episode of the Books and Freezer podcast with Stephanie, so I'm going to have a link down below. So definitely go check that out if you can't wait another week and you just want to know what all my favorites were. And next I read The Housemaid by Freida McFadden, and this is a book that I wanted to check out because I read the author's backlist thriller earlier this year, or last year rather, and that was The Perfect Son. And I want to check out more by them because, again, just like Stacy Willingham, I find that this author is one that just writes really bingeable, enjoyable stories. So in this one, we follow a housemaid who is working for this terrible woman who is super annoying. And this housemaid starts to fantasize about taking over her life because she seems to have it all. She is rich, she has a wonderful husband, and she starts to imagine herself in that role and then perhaps starts to take over her place. And this is one that is fun, but I'll be honest, it's the type where it's not so much a surprise what's going to happen. You just kind of follow the story as it goes along, so it's kind of crazy. So again, I would say it's more bingeable, but definitely not as good for me as her backlist title, The Perfect Son. So I definitely want to check out more about this author's work, but I do find this one to be weaker. It was a little bit forgettable, and I'm not worried that it missed my favorites list because it wouldn't have been on there anyway. Next is The Perfect Child by Lucinda. This is a backlist thriller that I checked out for myself. This follows a couple that come across a young abused child. This child needs a home, so they offer to help to foster them and then proceed to adopt them. The story is told through multiple perspectives, but primarily the mother, who is going through her own struggles of infertility, gets this option to, of course, adopt this young girl, but doesn't feel completely attached to her. This young girl is perhaps a bit psychologically abused. Well, not just perhaps, this is a reality. And so because of that, she has some strange attachment. She attaches very quickly to the father figure, but not to her. And this is a book that kind of balances the line between, is it a creepy kid book or is it more an evaluation of parenthood? And so I thought this book was going to be all about a super creepy child, and maybe that's what the author was intending it to be because other reviewers have described it that way. But perhaps because I'm a parent myself, I really found myself more putting myself in the shoes of the parent and seeing this child is not creepy but abused. And it kind of took the fun out of this book that other reviewers describe it to be, being like, ooh, this child is so creepy. And it's like, no, this is kind of a terrible situation. This book, if anything, reminded me a lot more of the themes explored in We Need to Talk About Kevin. And so it really explores nature versus nurture and just kind of gets into some heavier topics. So it's not so much fun, but the kind of book that will actually make you think and contemplate things. So if that's what you're looking for, you might want to check this one out. But I do think it was better done in We Need to Talk About Kevin, so I kind of recommend reading that one instead. And I also read an autobiography of A Werewolf Hunter by Brian Easton, which continues my reading of werewolf fiction from last year. This is a coming-of-age story that follows a young boy who is trained to be a werewolf hunter. And so this is a story that is also a coming-of-age narrative, which is something I really enjoy. Compared to a lot of other werewolf fiction, I found this one to be very serious in tone and not as cheesy or campy as you might expect. Instead, it is very well done. I also enjoyed the fact that it has a lot of Canadianisms within the story. It references a lot of Canadian places, which I always like as a Canadian. Can I get through one video without mentioning that? But I did enjoy this one a fair amount. I thought it was just a sweet story, a little bit unique. And again, it's hard to pull off werewolf stories right. And so I'm going to continue to slowly read through them so I can hopefully one day give you a full recommendations video full of all the really good werewolf stories, but they're hard to find. And finally, in continuing my promise to read all the dark and messed up books, I checked out A Certain Hunger by Chelsea Summers. And this is a horror satire that follows an individual who is a food critic. She is also somewhat addicted to sex, and she's also a serial killer. And this story is told almost in vignettes, so we follow her through the different chapters. It's told in a very intimate first-person perspective. And she, as you can imagine, is not the most likable character to follow. The story is very explicit, it is very vulgar. She is just not a nice lady, but it is a very enticing read. I do really enjoy the intersection between horror and food writing, and so I really liked a lot of what this book was doing. It had some smart and interesting scenes, definitely some things that were quite quotable within the story, and I definitely think it kind of pushes the limits. And if you enjoy those like really kind of out there books, like something again along the lines of American Psycho, I didn't think it was as good as that book, but I do think it has similar threads to the story. I like this one a lot. I'm probably going to read this one again before the end of the year because while I liked it a lot, I'm not quite sure if it has favorite potential. It's kind of one that you have to sit on for a while and either it grows on you or it doesn't, but I'm definitely glad I read it. It was weird, it was messed up, and exactly what I'm looking for this year. So that's it for this video here. I'd love to know of the books I talked about. Are there any that you're planning on checking out for yourself? And don't forget, if you want to check out the Books in the Freezer podcast, I'm going to have a link down below, and next week I'm going to have my final best of the year video, and we are going to be done with that series until, well, next year. And so if you're new to my channel and want to subscribe, I do read a lot of horror, thriller, science fiction, fantasy, and sometimes true crime. And if you want to help me out with this video, you can give me a thumbs up. You can drop an emoji, even if it's just like, you know, New Year, so like, you know, clinking glasses or something like that, celebrating the end of the year and the new year beginning. And if you want to hit that little notification bell, you'll never miss a video from me. Thanks so much for watching. I'll talk to you again soon. Okay, bye-bye.